hymnal to the first hymn and then turn back a page or two, there's a little section in there that has, do we affirm to covenant with each other? And then there are the 6 sources. Now, if you have an old hymnal, it's only 5 sources. We're up to 6 now, from which our living tradition draws. And what I'm doing now is it's part of a sermon series. We're doing the 2nd source today. And I'm doing one each 2nd Sunday of the month till we get through the 6. The 2nd source from the living tradition which we share is words and deeds of prophetic men and women which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. In this source, we look to the past to inform both the future and the present, with examples that inspire us to action. And I think this looking backwards is important. There's a quote I love, and I don't have a date for it, which I think would be really interesting to know. But it goes as such. The truth is this: the march of providence is so slow, and our desires so impatient. The work of progress so immense, and our means of enabling it so feeble. The life of humanity so long, that of the individual so brief, that we often only see the ebb of the advancing wave and are discouraged. It is history that teaches us to hope. And that was Robert E. Lee. I don't know if that was before or after the war. I'm guessing after. Today I want to talk about 2 people from our living tradition, for starters, from many, many possibilities. And they're quite different. One was a man of words, the other a woman of deeds. One a Unitarian, one a Universalist, one widely recognized, one unsung. One from far away from here who lived long ago, and one from closer to here who lived a little more recently. Each of these people is worthy of their own sermon, indeed their own book. We don't have that much time. Then I want to talk about the meaning for today and the future of these lives and their examples. The first one is called Socinus, born on December 5th, 1539 in Siena, not far from Florence. He was born Fausto Zozzini, but after the fashion of the day, Latinized his name. And so we know him mostly as Faustus Socinus. And if you ever read much theology, you're going to run across the word Socinian. It's after him. He was an indifferent student. Never did really well, but managed to get a job as a courtier to Isabella de' Medici in Florence. Hung around with Da Vinci and Michelangelo and that crowd. He was there for 12 years, which he later considered wasted time, until his uncle Lelio died and left him his papers. And when he read his uncle's papers, he found that his uncle to be one of the early Protestant reformers, what we call evangelical rationalists. And he was so moved by this that became his life's work. And he spent the rest of his life as a devoted theologian. He left Florence, went to Basel, Switzerland, lots of people there. Then he went from there to Kolozsvár, which was the seat of the only Hungarian king, or only Unitarian king ever, János Sigismund, where Transylvania became Unitarian. And he was there for a while and then went on to Krakow in Poland in 1579. He was all of 30 years old, 40, still young. He went to Krakow because he was known for his tolerance. You might not think of Krakow, Poland as a tolerant place, but that's where he went. And when he got there, he became the leader of a group known as the Polish Brethren. Their formal name was the Polish Minor Reformed Church. I mean, there was the Catholic Church, and there was the Reformed Church, which of course was the Calvinist tradition. But then there was the Minor Reformed Church, and they were a little different. One, they were anti-Trinitarian, which is just a long word for Unitarian. And they were heavily influenced by the Anabaptists. So they had this sort of bottom-up theology, very different from the other churches. And he became their leader, and he paid for that. He was attacked by drunken soldiers once, and no charges were ever filed. Later in his life, in 1598, a group of college students attacked his home, burned his books and papers, drug him out, beat him senseless, and were dragging him through the streets up onto a bridge to throw him into the river to drown. When a university professor saw what was going on, recognized who it was, and even though this professor was an Orthodox Catholic, he stopped the students and said, "I'll take over from here. You know, you guys shouldn't do this." And then he got him out of town so he could recuperate. He lived on until he was 64. Died when he was 64 in 1604. He spent a lot of time, though, in Rakow's, R-A-K-O-W. Town hadn't been there before, but a Polish noblewoman who became a member of the Polish Brethren and was a big anti-Trinitarian had this land, and they built a town there. And what's important about that town was it had a school, and it had a press. And so his writing got printed, and it got translated. In fact, the year after he died, he had written a catechism. We refer to it as the Rakovian Catechism. It was published the year after his death, translated and widely distributed to Germany, to Holland, to England. And in England, some of those ideas are going to stow away later on ships bound for America. And so Socinianism will sneak its way in through the borders. Socinius was a fabulous example of what we call rational Unitarian Christianity. It was really big at the time. They, of course, rejected the Trinity, but that's not all he rejected from traditional religion. He also rejected predestination, original sin, and the Orthodox concept of blood atonement. And he did this from scriptural authority. He argued for the full humanity of Christ. He also believed in free will. He believed in the authority of reason. And he believed that Jesus leads us to salvation through the example of how he lived his life. I think sometimes how many people are sitting in churches uncomfortable or have stopped going to church because they think there's no place for them. And if they read Socinius from the 16th century, they would say, yeah, that's it. This is who I am. I've had them come through the doors of churches. People who have picked up these old documents and go, oh, this is the way I want to be a Christian. He practiced religious toleration and pacifism as well. Unfortunately, the minor Reformed Church of Poland was completely repressed by 1658 as part of the Counter-Reformation. But he was a seminal thinker and a courageous writer, and he influenced an entire continent with his work, and indeed beyond that. Clearly a man of prophetic words. On the other hand, and a little closer to home, we have Hannah Jewett Powell, who was a doer of the word. She was actually born far away in Clinton, Maine in 1866. Clinton, Maine was a logging community, and that's the kind of community she grew up in. But she went off to Colby College. She worked her way through there and Tufts University. And if you know, Mr. Tufts, who founded that university, was a Universalist. And so she went there, she went through the divinity school, and graduated and was ordained a Universalist minister in 1899. She spent the next 22 years serving rural parishes, working as a school teacher, as a lecturer for the YWCA, and as a fundraiser for the Universalist Women's National Missionary Alliance. In 1921, the WNMA called her to be the minister of Inman's Chapel at the foot of Cold Mountain in North Carolina. And if you saw the movie or read the novel, those names seem a little familiar to you. There was a real person there. It was a hard land, and the industry was declining. It was a logging community, just like the one she had been born into. She goes there to serve them. There's a railroad going to Sunburst, North Carolina. Well, Sunburst, North Carolina is now under a lake. There was a railroad there because, the purpose of transportation was to get the goods out, not to bring people in. The nearest paved road was 6 miles away. The nearest school or doctor was 10 miles away. So she goes there in 1921. Some people think she was the first woman minister in North Carolina. I've not been able to verify that. I'm a little iffy on that. But she got there and she started regular Sunday worship. Farmers, mill workers, and loggers came to her church, as many as 150 on a Sunday. Now, Inman's Chapel, I've been in it, and it's about half the size of the sanctuary. So you couldn't get 150 people in there. They opened the windows, and people stood outside for the service to hear this woman preach in 1921 in North Carolina, because she was preaching the gospel of universalism. She started Sunday school for both adults and children. She had a women's group and a choir going. But she also understood that social service is a form of prayer. So in 1929, they built Friendly House just up the hill a little bit. It's in private hands now. And Friendly House, among other things, had the first kindergarten in North Carolina. And that's rural western North Carolina, the first kindergarten. They had a summer school for kids. They taught them the 3 R's, plus vocational schools, plus pride in their native mountain culture. It had a lending library. It had the Pioneer Night School, which did adult education. And with Ruth Downing, she extended the ministry to the small African American community there. By law and custom, they could not be in Friendly House, but both communities were served by Hannah Powell and her co-workers. Recognizing that we needed to serve bodies as well as spirits, she was able to bring in the first community health nurse to work at the Friendly House too. She retired in 1936 at the age of 70. But then in 1945 came out of retirement because the Friendly House was about to go under. And she tried to revive it as best she could, but unfortunately it was not successful. And I know people who have been there. There used to be exchanges. I once served a little church in eastern North Carolina that was Universalist Heritage. And some summers, groups of them would go up and they would be at Friendly House, and others would come down there. Really an amazing person. And we see prophetic words and deeds in Faustus Socinus and Hannah Powell. They're examples of hundreds from which we could draw. And there's lots of them we know because we've read all these names on UU t-shirts and coffee mugs and posters, and isn't that nice? Wearing buttons is not enough. Because what these people represent is not simply a source of pride. Oh, look at all the famous people who used to go, but they're dead now, to the church I attend now. What they do is challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil. That's the second source. Well, how do we do that? Well, the second source is quite specific. We confront these powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. I think it was really interesting 8 years ago at the end of the elections. One of the real dynamic things that came out of that, there was a wake-up call to the political and the religious left, was people voting for what they called moral values. They were values voters, and they were all voting for the conservative parties. Like I said, it was a wake-up call, but I think the religious and the political left hit the snooze alarm and rolled over. Because we've all heard a lot about the religious right. We've been hearing about this for a long time. But some of you out there should remember the religious left, who used to be quite active. The Berrigan brothers, David Dellinger, William Sloane Coffin, Martin Luther King, part of the religious left. And they and others like James Reeb and Viola Liuzzo, who were Unitarians who were basically martyred during the Civil Rights Movement, acted with prophetic power against what they saw as structures of evil. And I wonder today, where are they? I mean, we were all happy about some of the results that were in the elections, that people voted on things we believed in. But I want to know, where is the spiritual crusade for the rights of all to sacramental marriage? Not a legal thing, but a religious sacramental marriage. Who's making the scriptural argument against limiting the options of war, or for limiting the options of war making to pacifism or just war theory? That was something the religious left did. Where is the faith-based demands for economic justice and health care? For the widow, the orphan, and the stranger at the gate? Where is the religious argument for the reverence for all creation, for the stewardship of the earth? Religious liberals have traditionally led the struggle for justice. But I wonder where their voices and actions now. I see a few. Jim Wallace is one of my favorite people in the world, who leads a group called Sojourners. Well, I think what happened is political and often religious liberals have allowed the political and religious right to co-opt moral values as their own. I mean, we gave them the flag, we gave them the Bible, we are giving them morals now, because we're not making the argument. Indeed, due to our allergy to public religious, openly religious discourse, liberals long ago handed over lock, stock, and barrel moral authority in American culture to conservative orthodoxy. We're not going to talk about that. We don't like it, so we're not going to talk about it. What happens when we don't talk about it? We lose it, and it goes away, and somebody else picks it up. The only way it can be returned is to be re-earned. It cannot be seized through elections or lawsuits or internet petitions or even angry letters to the editor. And we must give up the notion that the supporters of the candidate for whom we did not vote are fundamentally stupid or evil. Most of them are virtually indistinguishable from us. And indeed, some of them are us. All of them have inherent worth and dignity. We love our 7 principles. What's the first of the 7 principles? The inherent worth and dignity of every person, even them. Every person. If we do not practice this, if we do not believe this, then what does it say about us? If we proclaim the inherent worth and dignity of every person and then condemn some of them because they don't agree with us politically. The way to justice first lies through compassion. Compassion for all people. If we, as a religious liberal people, wish to change the world, then we really have to accept and act upon the words of Gandhi. You must be the change you wish to see in the world. 4 years ago, Barack Obama, in his acceptance speech, talked about bending the moral arc of the universe. He didn't make up that phrase. Some people think he got it from Martin Luther King. Well, he may have, but Martin Luther King got it and always footnoted it and acknowledged it from Theodore Parker, an early 19th century Unitarian preacher who said that the moral arc of the universe bends inevitably towards justice. Our job is to try to jump up, grab a hold of that arc, and bend it a little steeper. And there is only one tool that will work, and that's love. That is the only thing that will bend that arc. The transformative power of love we have, much less can rely on, or the only transformative power we have, much less can rely on, is that of love. Indeed, long ago, the 1930s, one of the Universalist statements of faith declared a belief in the all-transforming power of love. It's the only thing that's ever worked, and it's the only thing that ever will work. Words and deeds of prophetic women and men, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. May we follow and learn from our exemplars and their prophetic words and deeds of love. Amen. We will now accept the offering which goes to support the work of this church.